Hello, third grade. We're back with Rump. We're on chapter 27. We only have a little bit left. I can't believe it. We left off with Frederick and Bruno. They have captured Rump, and Opal had the baby, and Rump's a little nervous about that, because you know what that means. Okay, chapter 27, The Miller and the Merchant. It's a very strange feeling to have your brain doing one thing and your body doing something else. It was like my mind was attached to some bizarre creature, and it was carrying me away captive. Soon, Frederick and Bruno caught up with me, and for the rest of the journey, they led me by a rope like a cow. But I hardly noticed. Rumpel is tighter than any real rope. It can't be cut or loosened. My legs would have carried me over the bridge and up the hill to the walls of the castle. They probably would have carried me right through the walls and through the fire and spears to get to Opal. So powerless was I against this magic. But with Frederick and Bruno, it was all too easy. When we reached the castle, the guards saluted them and opened the gates. We crossed the grounds, entered the castle doors, now gilded gold, marched up the grand golden staircase and down a long corridor to a large golden door with gold handles. Frederick knocked and we went in. The room was smaller than I expected. In the center stood a cradle covered with white satin and embroidered with gold thread. Opal hovered over the cradle. She looked very different from the last time I saw her. Her eyes were no longer blank, but sunken with exhaustion. She was pale and thin, and her golden hair was loose and disheveled. I guess being a queen and a mother makes you worried and tired, not to mention the added worry of your baby being taken away. The cradle began to wail, and Opal reached inside to pick up her baby and hold him close to her chest. She shook, and her eyes brimmed with tears, and she saw me watching. Please. I opened my mouth to say that I didn't want her baby. I just wanted to get away and never make another promise as long as I lived. But I couldn't. My tongue swelled in my mouth, and I couldn't say anything against the bargain. Well, 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 said another voice beside me. Our little man has returned to make good on his promise. It was Oswald, the miller, fatter than ever, his girth covered in red velvet, trimmed with gold threads. He looked like a giant tomato ready to burst. Now, daughter, give the little man what you promised, he said, his voice so oily it slithered. Opal clenched her jaw and stiffened, clearly trying to fight her father's command. But something prevented her, the magic. The same magic that commanded me. She was fighting just like I was against the invisible ropes that pulled me toward the baby. When I had spun her the gold, Opal had laughed at the idea of giving me her firstborn child. She hadn't taken the promise seriously, or perhaps she hadn't considered what it meant to be a mother. How she would love her child. She had thought it was a good joke. I never imagined she would make such a foolish promise. We had both been fools. I didn't want her baby, and she didn't want to give it to me. What was the point of a bargain neither person wanted to keep? But the magic was closing in on both of us. We had no choice now. I knew you would go to her, said the miller. After the king took her away, I didn't worry because I knew you would spend the gold, and Opal would give you anything in return. Anything, and the gold would be hers. He laughed, his whole body jiggling. But her unborn child? Her unborn child? Well, I suppose this will teach her not to make such rash promises. Now, daughter, give him what you promised. Give him the child. I unwillingly took a step forward, and Opal shook as she tried to back away from me, but couldn't. We were just a few steps apart. Oh, I lost my place. We were just a few steps apart. Opal clutched her infant tighter still. Don't come near me or I'll scream. I'll scream and they'll break down the door and you'll be dragged into the dungeon and put in stocks or hanged. The miller laughed. Don't talk such nonsense, silly girl. What would the king say were he to learn that you never really spun the gold but bargained his child to this creature? This little demon? Demon? I have been called many things, but demon? That felt a bit harsh. You've already fallen out of favor with him, Oswald continued, but give over the child and we can make things right. He'll be forgiving of your carelessness if he has the gold. He'd rather have a gold than a child. Would he really? People often said the king loved gold more than anything, but certainly not more than his own son, his heir. No, he wouldn't. He loves our son, Opal protested. It doesn't matter, said the miller. You made a promise. He spun you the gold. The child is his. I saw then that the miller understood the magic. It was like he could see the invisible ropes pulling at me. He knew, perhaps he had known all along, that I had to take the baby, that I had no control. But there was something else in his eyes, a malicious pleasure, as if he were enjoying his suffering. And it was only the beginning. He wanted to take the baby so he could inflict more pain. The miller clasped his hands over his belly. Now let's get on with it, shall we? We have much more interesting things to discuss than babies. The invisible ropes pulled tighter, and this time Opal was the one who stepped forward. If I reached my arms out, I would be able to touch the baby. Opal was trembling. I'll give you all the riches in the kingdom, anything you want. Please don't take my baby. The miller scoffed. He gave you all the riches you have. I hated to admit it, but he had a point. And you shall have plenty more children when we are through. Only take care not to bargain them away. The miller's voice turned harsh and cold. Give him the child, girl. Please, Opal broke down and cried, each breath coming out in raking sobs. I was filled with pity for her. I fought as hard as I could against my next step. I thought of my own mother holding me close as she whispered my name in my ear. Had she meant to bestow such a mean fate upon me? Did she want for me to be tangled in all of this magic? All because of a name? A name is supposed to be your destiny. It's supposed to give you power. But I was utterly powerless. My name told me I was, and I didn't see how I could change that. Opal was before me now, kneeling and holding her baby to me. He was fast asleep, a tiny creature. Luckily, he looked nothing like his father. What is his name? I asked. Archie, she whispered. Archibald, Bartholomew, Oswald. And she sobbed more after saying these last two names, and I couldn't blame her. I took the baby from her arms, and Opal slumped to the ground, wetting the wood planks with her tears. Here I held the future king in my arms. He started to squirm and make noise. What was I supposed to do when it made noise? Good, said the miller. Now that bargains have been kept and promises fulfilled, I think it best we move on. Yes, little demon, we have business to discuss. The miller's eyes were now overflowing with an insatiable greed. I looked away in disgust, and suddenly I realized why the room felt so small. Straw. Walls of straw. Mountains of straw. It towered on both sides of the room, covering all the walls to the ceiling. There was only a narrow space from the door to the center of the room where the cradle lay, and then a small clearing behind that for the window. To my right, the straw was cleared for the fireplace, and in front of the fireplace was a spinning wheel. A chill ran down my spine, and I shivered. No, I said, never again. Oh, come, said Oswald. I think you rather enjoy making the gold. Gives you a feeling of power, usefulness. Your mother felt the same. He grinned wickedly. My mother? But oh yes, he said. I knew of her gift. I met her long before she came to the mountain. I believe I was the first to benefit from her skill, as I shall be the last. How delighted I was to learn that these things can be passed on. My insides went cold. The floor tilted beneath me. You're the merchant, I said. You're the one who made her spin all that straw into gold. Oh, no, I never made her. I believe she was rather enthusiastic, and we always struck a bargain. It was always a fair trade. Straw isn't worth all that much, you know. I was rather generous, really. He rubbed his immense belly. But then she ran to that blasted mountain, thought she could hide there in all the gold. But I caught up to her, and good thing, too. Provident, even. The miller had just died, with no sons to carry on his work. I was wealthy enough to buy the mill, and I think your mother was glad in the end. I dare say you're alive because I kept her so well fed after your father died. And aren't you grateful? You probably wouldn't have been born had I not bargained with her, the poor soul. It's a pity she died. He gave out a long, exaggerated sigh. But I did hope that her son might show a bit of the same promise, so I waited. I was patient, and you did not disappoint. Frederick and Bruno were charged to keep an eye on you, and how delighted I was when my sons came and told me that outlandish story that you had a pile of gold in your cottage. It was all too easy to get you come begging, and then you became quite greedily, wanted more food than everyone else. You didn't even share. Shameful. And then we had a blunder with the king. Yes, he's a bit more attentive than his predecessor when it comes to the gold being traded into the kingdom. I should have known. Well, things turned out better than I had hoped. What with you spinning for Opal, and now she's the queen. Opal remained curled on the ground, sobbing. But we are not through, you see, little demon. The Opal is a king, and I am lord of the mountain. The king is not pleased with her lack of performance these past months. Of course, we have made our excuses with her, delicate situation, but that has all passed. And so it has become necessary that we please our king and perhaps ourselves. A little more, he chuckled, running his hand over the straw. I hated him. Rage gathered in my stomach, burned in my chest, making my head throb. He was the demon. He was the reason for my mother's sorrow, her entrapment, and her death. All my troubles had begun with the miller. I'm not spinning any more gold, I said. Really? Said the miller, amused. The baby began to cry in my arms, and Opal wailed too. I think I've got all I can handle, thanks. I backed away. He could hold me here forever, but there was nothing he could offer me that would make me spin a single straw into gold. Nothing. But you haven't heard what I have to offer, he said, grinning wickedly. A chill ran down my spine. I just knew it was going to be something awful. I don't want anything. I'm not spinning. I started to back away with the baby in my arms. Better to stop here. Just take the baby and leave. But Frederick and Bruno grabbed my arms on either side and held fast. Oh, I think you'll reconsider in a moment, said the miller. It's such a good bargain. For your gold, I shall give you... He reached behind a stack of straw, and the whole pile shook as though an animal was struggling to get out. I shall give you your friend, unharmed. The miller pulled a girl from out of the straw, bound and gagged. One of her eyes was black and swollen, but the other was wide, burning with a fierce and savage rage. Who do you think it is, guys? Red. And that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 28 for next week is titled Grasping at Straws. I hope you guys enjoyed that chapter. I miss you all so much. Keep reading every day.